206.
Mic check, mic check, mic check. Go.
Salutations.
1112. 1-2.
Yo, what's up, world? It's Armand here. Welcome to another episode of the 206. This is today, January 1st, 2021, our first recording of the new year.
Hey.
We all know what to say. At the very least, how interesting of a year 2020 was. So I know we're all excited to check out how the rest of this year goes. Today, we're going to be talking about all things related to sex. And with us today, we have a very special guest, a close friend to everyone here at the 206. Her name's Ruha, otherwise known to myself as Peruvian Spice. How you doing today, homegirl?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
No
Excited.
doubts. So yeah, we can just go ahead and get straight into it. I know there's many things we want to talk about, but I guess we can just get the conversation popper started with this, and I'm going to direct it to you, our guest, Ruha, as we normally do to start off the conversation. And the question is, do we live in a hypersexual society? Yes or no?
Okay, so I love this question because I think there is not one straight answer. I used to think that yes, we do live in a hypersexual society, period. But I think it's a little more complicated than that. I have reflected more on the topic and discussed with some friends. And there was a point that I thought it was really smart, like it was really on point, and I reflected more on it. That we, like in our evolution and the past civilizations of human species, sex was a lot more part of the everyday life. Like a lot of things, a lot of activities of life had to do with pleasuring our basic needs in every sense, like food, sex, everything. So,
Kudos to that.
right? And I think, like, imagine, like, I don't know, couple thousand years ago, everything was about a war and sex and gathering food or hunting food. That was it, right? So that was like the motivations for life. Like those were the only things that, not the only things. Obviously, there was philosophy and math and poetry, and there was art and beautiful things. But those were like definitely something that everybody had. Like, okay, this is us. We fight. We have sex. We eat. So and I think those societies were probably more sexually active, or I don't know if the word is active, but more like sexually um, inclined maybe, than now that we have so much more knowledge and science and so much more advanced in our stage of evolution as a civilization and as a species. But however, I think that considering how much we have evolved in everything else, I don't think we have evolved enough in our consciousness about our sexuality and our relationship with sexuality. So maybe in proportion to where we are now in our scientific and like moral advances, I think in proportion of that, our sexuality is not has not evolved enough. So in that sense, I would say yes, we do live in a hypersexual society. But if we just wanted to compare just the quantity, I think no, perhaps 1,000 years ago it was more sexual society. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if that
Yeah.
point makes sense.
No,
Interesting.
that is something that stands out to me because go ahead, Jason. You want to say something?
I found that interesting. I hadn't really thought about our history, where we come from, and sort of the base realities, including maybe a more sexually driven society in the past. Because my initial reaction was, it seems like we're living in that. Yet, kind of putting that into context a little bit and expanding the thinking, for me, it's quite interesting to imagine how much maybe we actually have evolved beyond, I don't know, base needs of survival. So compelling.
Yeah, for me, because again, I'm not a historian by any means, and also I can't time travel, go back in the time with the pen and pad and tally up how much sex everyone was having. So I can't say one way or the other if we're having more or less sex than back during those ages. But what I can say is someone who is living in modern times and someone who has obviously observed the reality around me and see the way we collectively approach sex and conversations surrounding sex. I would unequivocally say that I believe we live in a hypersexual society. And again, I don't think of it, as you said, as quantity. What I mean by hypersexual is it's weird. It's like the focus and attention on sex, and most of that being misguided, you know. And so one of the biggest things I think I think of when I hear hypersexual society is too much of our identity, or our sense of identity,
Mhm.
is tied to sex. And in one sense, it our identity is tied to sex, because there is no identity, there is no conversation happening right now without sex, right? That's the only reason why we're able to be here, because the sex is how humans are created and humans reproduce. But in the sense of like, we tie too much of our sense of like what our purpose is, what our values are, not even so much value, but what are how much of our sense of self is attached to our sexuality. I think that that's way overblown, and it causes a lot of misconceptions and unhealthy attitudes towards sex. And that's my biggest thing when I say we live in a hypersexual society.
I really agree with that as well. The thing is, to me, it's interesting and important to think, how do we get here and why?
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
it is part of our physical nature. It is part of very important part of human relationships. It's literally how we exist, as we said, like, and we form families based on having sex first, obviously. So it is very important, but not just important, it's innate in our existence,
Exactly.
sexuality. But it seems to me that when you look at history, we didn't have much more going on for ourselves, so we had all our physical needs to take care of, and sex was one of them. And then it would go sometimes crazy, and it would go to extremes, or like basically it was very focused on just satisfying the need and not in the meaning of it. But
Mm,
now that we have advanced so much, I feel like we haven't advanced enough in our understanding of our sexuality. But we have advanced in everything else and so many other things. And I think that has to do with our consciousness about our purpose in life, like our purpose of being here, our consciousness about identity, awareness of our identity. What is our identity? Is our identity our physical body, or is our identity our mind or our soul? Like, this awareness is lacking. So that's why I feel like we haven't advanced that much in our understanding of sexuality. And that's why it has become so distorted and over glorified in today's society. Maybe before it wasn't actually over glorified. It was just like eating, I don't know.
it was
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
that's
like
what I mean.
business to survival. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Whereas now, since we understand so many other things, but not this, so it has become now, yes.
It's much more to me, and I'm not saying, because to me, sex isn't. It's obviously a physical thing, but in one sense, but there's also a very emotional, in my perspective, spiritual nature to it that makes it very intimate, or that can make it very intimate, or that to me, sex is inherently intimate. But to me, it's very in modern times psychological in ways that it doesn't need to be psychological. And I can elaborate on that later. But I also want to pose this question to the group, and maybe Ruha, again, you can maybe talk about. Now you talked about your current understanding. You referenced your understandings growing up, and you might have answered a certain way. But I
Mhm.
want to ask the question of, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions surrounding
Mhm.
sex?
So the thing is that since we don't have a true understanding as a society of the meaning of sex, why is it that we have this need innate in us? Then basically most of the things that we know about sex are misconceptions. There are some more dangerous than others, but I want to compare it to eating. Like, we can think that eating is just a physical need that we have for survival, but at the same, we know that eating, if you eat like junk food, then you're actually have no nutrients, and this you're not actually living life. You're not
Exactly.
healthy, right?
Mhm.
And
It's
food
unhealthy. It's dangerous for you.
is in fact dangerous. Exactly. So food has a higher purpose than just keeping your stomach full. Uh, so I think of sex in that way as well. So yes, it is a physical need, and it is a physical impulse, and we need it to continue our civilization. of course, but it's not just that. And if we believe that our identity is body, mind, and soul, then it is inevitable that during sex, even the most animalistic sex, it's still two individuals with body, mind, and soul. It's not just their body. So if we believe that, if we believe that we are body, mind, and soul, we cannot ever disconnect our mind and spirit from when we're having sex, even if we think we're having the wildest, most animalistic sex. We cannot. What we are doing is suppressing our mind and the soul, perhaps, if that's what one chooses to do. But it doesn't mean that they're not there. So what happens to the mind and soul when they are not involved fully in the physical activity, when you're not being your full holistic self in the sexual activity in the moment? Then your mind and soul, actually, first of all, they are very confused about what's going on, and then you have all this baggage and all these like roller coasters of emotion. Or you might not at all, and you can like leave it and go on with your life immediately after and forget that you just had sex or the name of the person you had sex. And but we cannot deny that your mind right now and your soul is confused and doesn't know how to relate to that moment. And if you have a moment where your mind and your soul just disconnected from your body, nobody can say that that can be good unless you're meditating.
Mm.
On
So
point.
so I do have, I believe that there is a big misconception in first that sexual experience is important. I do not think it's important. I think it's dangerous to believe that. I think,
Ooh,
in
ooh.
fact,
Wait, come on. Clarify. What do you mean by you don't think what's important?
Sexual
Sexual.
experience.
experience,
Oh, like
having
to have yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, to have a bunch
experience
of sexual experience before a certain period of time.
exactly
Yeah,
before
that's very
deciding
yeah,
to be
very
with
unhealthy.
one person, or just in general, just having people think that you have to have practiced enough, quote unquote
Yeah.
practice, or that you first have to sleep with that person before, like several times, and before you make a decision to commit to that person.
Right.
Yeah, I
I
think that's
think this
trash
is
too.
all big BS. No, this, in fact, affects a lot your conception of the other person, of yourself. It's totally overrated. Totally overrated. If that was true, then that means that no, let's say, marriage in history has ever been happy in the past because they didn't have sex before having
Right.
before getting married, and that's just not fair to say.
Hmm.
So
Right.
that to me is a very big misconception. Um, and then I also think it's a big misconception that men and women experience different. Um,
Mm.
like that our minds or our soul are different in the moment of sex, that men can be more disconnected from their mind and soul and just like do it with their body, and that women cannot disconnect it. I think that's a lie. From personal experience, that's a lie. I have been very comfortable disconnecting my mind and soul from the act. I do not think that that was good because, as I said before, our mind and soul is affected. We're just suppressing that how it's affected, but it is. And I
We're either
think
suppressing or just completely oblivious and unaware to how it's affecting us.
exactly, exactly. But it's not that it's not there. We cannot actually separate the three realities from each other. We're just exactly, we're oblivious of it, or suppressing it. But sooner or later, something in your mind and soul is affected. And the same happens with men. Why would men be different? We're the same species.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
Right.
so to me, that is just wrong and not fair to think that men have a different experience, and to me that's an excuse to make some men think that, well, this is just my need because I'm a man and I have a penis and I have to take care of it and I have no
Right.
choice, like as if they don't have a mind and a soul to make like more elevated decisions.
Mm. Yo,
Right.
so with that, Jason, Tim, as men with penises, would you guys like to interject your opinion into this
Well,
conversation?
I was thinking about how long it took me to reach the level of consciousness that I'm at in relation to sex. And we're talking about misconceptions. Guys, there's like 1,000 ways. I, I remember clearly how I thought about sex in general and what expectations were in place in regards to women when it came to sex. And I think that's just indicative of how just ingrained and influential, you know, are other sources of what sex is like, whether it's TV, video games, misinformation from other people's direct personal experiences, and then just knowing that other social realities of society, like loneliness, self-esteem, has pathways that reach and connect to sex as well. So being able to break through all these barriers and have people receive a lot of the knowledge, especially around the sciences, the social sciences we have today surrounding sex and what's actually happening, physiologically, mentally, emotionally. um it's so important, and it's just going to take a lot for us to break through all these misconceptions that we have. So I'm just very grateful to be where I'm at in relation to this, but I also understand just the amount of work we all have to do collectively. It's very interesting.
What about you, Southwest J?
Hey, well, I really appreciate the perspective you're offering here, Ruha, and your explanation, how you're able to express it. It's really elevated, and I feel grateful for hearing it this way. It's helpful for me because I'm thinking about my own experience with sexuality and connection, and how ideally sexuality can really cement a bond in a certain way. Clearly, we know if a child is born, say one act of animalistic sex, and a child is born, that all of a sudden now, what was once very carnal became very committed. At least, I don't know, is it an 18-year commitment legally? If your heart is somewhat open, maybe now you're thinking about it in a whole nother way. Yet the disconnect I see in society, and in myself included, it's very real. And even in the process of growth and maturation, there are, when we talk about sort of inherent qualities, it seems to me too, we're not maybe talking about what are the, say, qualities to evolve our perspectives here. And I'm looking in society, I'm and me myself maybe not looking well. Maybe I'm not asking the right questions, or seeking the right experience, people who have expertise, etc. My sense is, though, the common conversation with sex, even among people who are partners, I'm not so sure. I've heard partners talk about sex as a mental, spiritual, and physical experience, albeit, like we're saying, on the presumption that it is all that. Now, how do we learn how to let go of certain conceptions, invite new ones? What does that process look like? So that's not a process I can speak to. I don't have experience with a conscious sexuality, so to speak. So I would kind of, I'll leave my comments at that. I would be curious to ask us here, and perhaps Ruha in particular, if in your experience or in your current understanding, how does one know if you're engaging yourself with someone in these all these facets of who we are? And maybe even for myself and other listeners, what are some words of advice or wisdom around making a choice from how one might even uh, perceive sexuality and sexual attraction, and how might we start to shift some of those, maybe, although true, and maybe, I don't know, at least in the moment they feel very real. How would one say, okay, yeah, Ruha, hey, yeah, I'm a man after all. I need this to suffice this need. I want to learn how to put it all in perspective. What can you suggest to me? Maybe that's the question I'm asking.
That kind of feeds into our next question too: how does sex education affect men and women? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So it's very interesting, and I really wish all men ask this question, but also a lot of women should ask this question too, because I think it all comes down to, what do you think of yourself? What do you think that you are? First of all, do you think that you're your body, or you're your mind and your knowledge, or you're your soul, your qualities, your character? So I think once one defines how they see themselves, then it is a lot easier to take the next step. It's not even a next step, it would be just a natural awareness and understanding that you're not just your physical body, so you don't need to constantly pursue the satisfaction of your physical body. And that applies to other physical needs as well, and material things. So maybe that is like the number one thing that we have to be on the same page, if we believe this, if you are body, mind, and soul. The other thing is remembering that if you are a body, mind, and soul, then the other person is also body, mind, and soul, and it's not just their body. So if you truly believe that you have a soul, then the other person also has a soul. If you believe that you are a conscious, aware being with knowledge and understanding of the reality around you, and you understand that things have consequences, but the things also have meaning, then you should consider that the other person also understands that, or at least has the potential of understanding that. So then it comes down to what would be your goal then with this person. Now, I don't think sex is a bad thing. Obviously, I don't want this to come off like that. I think
It's
people want.
impossible for it to be a bad thing inherently.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
impossible.
Exactly, but it is not in itself a bad. In fact, it's a wonderful thing. In fact, it's the bond that connects all of humanity, actually.
Do you mind if I
Without
throw in
it,
an analogy, Ruha?
sorry, sorry.
So do you mind if I throw in an analogy?
Please, please.
Or just what I always tell people on certain things, and again, I've mentioned this in other podcasts, other episodes that we've done, excuse me. And it's like I really think it's an inhibitor to growth and consciousness when we have conversations about anything and we're stuck in this paradigm, this binary way of thinking of is it good or is it bad? Because it takes us away from truly understanding the thing in of itself, because we're so constantly worried about if the action is deemed or perceived as good as bad based off the contemporary judgment of the thing. And for me, it's like, for example, anything can be good and bad. Let's think of water, right? Without water, there is no life, right? But water in an improper form can be detrimental to us as a society. If a hurricane is barreling through the Gulf of Mexico and is going to hit New Orleans, I'm pretty sure the people of New Orleans don't really care that it's water and water is good. Yeah, when you drink it out of your refrigerator and it's filtered, water is necessary and vital to you. But in the form of a hurricane, it's bad. Sex, like anything else, is the same way. What is the consciousness? I mean, more so instead of thinking is sex good, sex bad, think about, again, as you said, yourself, and have consciousness surrounding the concept within itself. Excuse me. And think about what may be proper forms and dynamics that sex could be the thing that it's meant to be, which is a healthy and beautiful one and an intimate one, and something that is satisfying an innate desire within us, as opposed to just doing it because I have the desire. And I'm kind of like, either not gonna really do it because I have this conception of it being bad unless it's done right, or I have this perception, oh no, forget it, sex is not bad at all, so therefore I'm just gonna approach it with no consciousness whatsoever.
I love that analogy. It's perfect. I think, again, to me, goes back to your identity as a whole. How do you see yourself? What are the pieces that compose you? And then once you understand that, or you agree to that, and you believe these, it's kind of inevitable to have sex with consciousness. Even the most animalistic sex, you will still choose to be animalistic, but still have consciousness of, like, what is your intention, your purpose with this partner on this moment, the partner that you're having sex with in this moment. What is your purpose? What goal is it just to satisfy your physical need, or what? But when you understand that the other person is also that, then it's just so much easier. Not as easier, it's inevitable. It's inevitable because
Right.
now you're seeing two equals that are body, mind, and soul. I think it's actually very simple, and I don't want to complicate it by over explaining. It's very simple.
I have a question directed for both Tim and Jason and for you as well, Ruha. And then, once I ask both, you guys can go in whatever order you want. So to Tim and Jason, I'm going to ask you guys specifically when it comes to your consciousness and understanding surrounding sex. As a male, how do you think your understanding of sex growing up has affected you, and how much of it have you attached to your sense of identity of being masculine? And then to Ruha, would you say you've noticed any differences, in your sexual experiences? Because you're married now. Congratulations. I mean, I know it's been a couple years, and I've already congratulated you, but that's my official podcast way of doing it. Anyways, your sexual experiences, within this. Within this fortress of well-being, which is marriage, as opposed to doing it outside of it. So, floor is open for any of you guys to answer whenever you want.
Yeah, when I think about this, I think about conformity just specifically and how powerful it is just to be following a set of norms established by your family, through religious practices, through behavioral practices that you're used to seeing your family exercise just on an everyday basis, and never questioning it, never having a moment to just, excuse me, without fear, without the fear of repercussion, of backlash, question what you've always known to be true or familiar or normal. And now it's with me, growing up and going through the handful of initial romances that I've been and being involved in sexual behavior, there was so much anxiety and fear for me because, my family was raised very spiritually, and, sex before marriage was a huge no-no. So all I knew and felt like a huge part of me, like 95% of me, was just fear and the fear of being caught. Nothing else, you know? Maybe part of what I thought I felt was, love, commitment. This was the way it was supposed to be. But for the most part, it was fear. There wasn't no objective step back. Let me look at this in a very educational way from a perspective of who we are through evolution, and how our attitudes are shaped by society and media. None of that. So, with Armand's analogy and everything Ruha and co-host Jason is saying, it just reminds me so much of how much more of a conversation we need to have about it, and nuanced conversation about it, because conformity is just so powerful. And I just feel that a lot of the friendships I've made, we've only reached other nuanced conversations once we break the barrier of fear, because there's so much in society that just makes us constantly anxious, constantly apprehensive. And I feel that once those barriers are broken, we can just simply have a conversation about it and make it easier for everyone involved in that conversation, for our minds to really dip in other perspectives. After, the green light is go and it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to be afraid. It's okay to talk about this. I know this is all you've known about sex, but let's establish right now that, it's okay to talk about these things, in a different way. So that's the only question reminds me of.
Adding to that, Tim, and to answer the question, Armand, and I appreciate this concept or this reality of fear being instilled in at a young age. Like this would happen to me, I would say as well. Maybe that's society. Such as sex education, I think about first. Let me just offer one thing I remember in 5th grade at school. We had a sex education day or 2 days in a row, something, right? 5th grade. And the boys in 5th grade all came together with one of the male teachers and had a conversation around this, like puberty and other things. And the girls in the school went with one of the teachers, who's a woman, and had the same
Female,
conversation
yeah.
over
I
there.
don't like that
Yeah, so I was going to comment
separation.
that.
I'm like, you have. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to comment that our my initial introduction to sex education included It didn't include any women. It was first around men. I like the idea of it from a perspective of, do you know what your body is doing or what's happening to that? Just from the perspective of like an adult male sharing with a young male what's going on, just like an adult female sharing with a young female about their body, about through experience. And at the same time, it didn't teach me anything about women at that moment. We didn't talk about women. We didn't talk about women's bodies, really. Maybe we did, and I forgot about it. And we definitely didn't talk about sex education from a perspective of like relationship, what you value about yourself and others. It was mainly about just
Anatomical.
Reducing it to a purely physical phenomenon.
Here's what's going to happen to your body. Here's this and here's that. So now with my personal education, say with my family, sex is a very intense kind of conversation in my household for reasons I won't explain right now, but maybe later there's time for that. But what I'll add to that is within that growing up phase, and fear was a big part of it. And I'm not so sure it was being impressed upon me from a conscious place. And I'm not so sure I was receiving it accurately, say, from the adult perspectives around me. But as a young child, I was very sensitive and very scared that sex was something maybe dangerous and bad unless you do it this certain kind of way. You have to kind of approach it like this. So I had this maybe intense view on it. So when I then think about my personal experience with sexuality, similar to Tim, I felt very like I needed to hide it, like keep it from certain people. And then also within myself, I had incredible internal turmoil. And in fact, my sexuality, this wasn't with a committed partner that I engaged in my first sexual experience when I was 27 years old. I was waiting for this idea of a partner for marriage, and we were going to do this in this way, and I was going to avoid all this fear. I was going to somehow make this choice and no fear and no nothing. It's going to be the way the good Lord intended it, so to speak. It was this kind of narrative in my mind. So when it didn't go down like that, that really shook me really intensely. And then rather than feeling like I was going to learn from it, because I kept it so secret and private,
Right.
I wasn't telling people who might have who could have assisted me in my personal turmoil, people who knew me and in particular, even like my parents, perhaps, who are cool enough, we could have this conversation. Yet I was scared to death to tell them anything that was against, say, our ethos growing up, because we also I grew up in a sort of in the Baha'i context now, yet and still being raised in any religious practice, it doesn't mean we live that our household practices all those things anyway. It doesn't mean that our understanding of the, say, guidance in our faith practices, that we really maybe have deeper awareness around these things. So we might have a very simple, basic understanding, or maybe we don't have an understanding. We bring in a bunch of old stuff into this new thing, and we project onto this other kind of like something else. We project what we think. And so some of that energy absolutely showed up when I was a young person. I could see that I was grappling my parents, my mom in particular, my dad in particular, their views, and then my personal view, and then my brothers. I grew up, I have brothers that also older and younger. So we learn all differently around sex. And my brothers and I all have very unique experiences around sex. I think that, and like drastically different, like not to call out anyone else, but I just a shout out to my younger brother. His wife is the only woman he's ever had sex with. Now, that we're in the same family, that's not the case for me, and my older brother can speak for himself. I kind of outed him a little bit, but he's married and has children now. He's moved on.
My older brother, he's lived a life. He's lived a life.
He's lived a life, and again, he's been in a committed relationship for 17 years, of which a marriage has been over 10 years, and children are involved. So, I mean, as far as like some of the stuff, he's moved on from some of the growth phases of, deciding, partnership, etc. So for me, because I felt like I was afraid to tell people, people also had this vision or this view of me in this certain light. I think my image to certain people, I was afraid to tarnish that and to be authentic. So I hid it and left it private. Now, naturally, to be private between two people, sexuality between two people is fair. That's absolutely, that's fine. Yet it didn't feel good to me. So I needed kind of like to learn some things, figure some things out. And it took me a very long time to start to trust people. In fact, it took such a long time that after this sexual experience and this partner, we went our separate ways, and I began to have kind of more promiscuous energies, and it was so kind of conflicting the whole time. I couldn't allow myself to do it in a sober way. So I became then I compounded this like misunderstanding with this kind of feeling of I was attracted to this, yet I also felt ashamed of it. And maybe it was like this idea that I wouldn't allow myself to go there with a partner physically unless I kind of shut my mind off, which through inebriation, I was able to do that for a short period of time naturally, only to then come to a more conscious and sober state at some point, realizing like, I am digging myself deeper here. Why am I doing this? How do I get out of this? And there was a time where I couldn't get out of it because I found myself like as if slipping down this hole, if you will, for the analogy, because I'm not referring to sex per se, but my personal experience with what I was going through. I was slipping and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't ask for help. I just
That's
pretended
the
like
manly way. Keep it to
nothing,
yourself and keep battling on.
keep battling on. And it got to a point where I got in so many situations that when Ruha said baggage, my God, like it came to a point where it
I
was
got Gucci bags.
God, like it came to a point where I was almost lost entirely. I almost started to question everything that I was about and what I wanted to do with my future. In fact, I even got to a point where I considered, if you will, selling myself to the contemporary notion of what sex is in our society. I was almost there before something really intense literally changed my life, of which I'll leave that as a cliffhanger for a future episode. But in any case, it took some drastic effects or impacts of my choices to help me start to open up to people. That was just opening up to people. I'm not even talking about healing or learning. I'm just saying, like, I'm sharing this now. So I've been on a path of growth around sexuality in this way for some time, and I still find myself learning, like, in those energies showing up and having to now in a more conscious state navigate that. And it looks different case by case and energy by energy, season by season. Yet what I can say for sure is that there is still a lingering of this like internal fear, or that I'm doing something bad when I think about sexuality. There's like it's a perversion, in my opinion, of sexuality that has been there for quite some time. So I've been trying to learn about it. So this has been helpful in a certain regard to explore deeper. Like, okay, how are these interplays of my past and present? What do I do with that, and how do I learn from that? So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
No doubt. That's a lot. I appreciate it. And that there's some things I can add on to some of the things you said, but I want to get back to Ruha and if she can kind of talk about some of her experiences and how she's learning this process, inside the context of a marriage and out of it.
Sure. Are you going first?
No, it's all you, girl.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Very interested to hear you both. I relate a lot to most of the things that you both share, especially regarding fear and just growing up within my family, but also my society. The concept of sex, especially from a perspective of females, was always surrounding the sentiment of fear. Um, and then particularly with Jason about you how you face that fear, but then you actually never overcame it. That was exactly my case as well, but when I was 20. So my family also sex was particularly my family was taboo, and it was because of religious faith
Right.
beliefs. It was not only because of faith, because now I actually understand the principle of chastity in that spiritual perspective. Now 15 years later I understand it, but for my parents it was the only thing that they told us basically was like it has to do with morality. It's just not good, is immoral. So I think that the faith and their culture, the Middle Eastern culture, affected the way that they taught us about sex, my sisters and I. So, but I actually believe that the spiritual belief behind what they were trying to teach us, and maybe even then they didn't realize this because of their culture. It's actually that it's not merely that it's immoral. Like it's not even immoral. I don't think that's an issue of morality. I think it's an issue of identity. Again, I
Yeah.
think it's an issue of if we are spiritual beings, then we do not need to constantly be prey to our physical needs. Then we're not evolving as an individual human and as civilization. We are retarding
Exactly.
our evolution by constantly trying to feed our physical needs. But yeah, so my experience was a lot about surrounding fear, especially as I said, because of being female. Our sex ed at school was basically, as a woman, as a girl, you have to say no. And if a guy tries to convince you to have sex to prove your love to him, you have to say no. He's lying to you. He just wants to use you. And then obviously it was a protection as well for STDs and for pregnancy. So like sex ed wasn't actually sex ed. It was it was just be afraid of
It
sex.
never is.
Yeah,
It's
be
never
afraid of
proper education.
exactly. It was be afraid of boys and be afraid of the sexual act because of pregnancy and STDs. So it wasn't really education. So so that was that fear from that side, and the other fear from my family side was that it was immoral. Um, and then my entire society also had, which is actually most societies, a double standard of sex for boys and
All
girls.
societies.
Most societies do, where a boy is great when he has a lot of sex and a girl is a slut if she has a lot of sex. So, and then when I was 20 and I was in this relationship and decided to like quote unquote face the fear, it was honestly I was in a relationship with this person for a year and it was extremely disappointing because actually the person was a terrible person. He had a girlfriend the entire time. I don't blame him.
Oh wow.
He was actually the product of his society as well, right? So um, I felt after that, I was like, there, I should not be afraid of it. This was unconscious. I only think of this now in retrospective, okay? I feel like what I was thinking was, I shouldn't be afraid of this. I should own this.
Mm.
And if things they say it's dangerous for a woman, let me show you how dangerous I can be. And then I started going for
Mm.
quantity over quality.
Mm.
And that's how it was for like several years after that. And I think all of that I was like like how you said it, Jason, promiscuous energies. I had that as well. That's a very nice way of saying it. I had that thinking, maybe subconsciously, that this is how I own this fear. Like there's nothing to be afraid of. I'm to be afraid of, you know? Like I'm for others to be afraid of. But then obviously that is going to affect your self-esteem, your self of identity. And I think that is why, because of the self-esteem and identity and how you see yourself in the world and what role you play in society, what role you play with the opposite sex, if that's what you're interested in, like how you see yourself is the reason why in spiritual beliefs, is recommended to not have uncommitted sex because of how it affects our mind and our soul, because it affects our sense of identity, and it retards our progress, and it
Right.
confuses us about our role, etc. So it's not about whether it's moral or not, it's just how it affects
Exactly.
us. It's the same as they also recommend eating healthy and not eating junk food, right? So it's the
And
same.
here's
So
the
it's not that
thing.
it's immoral.
Exactly, and because that's what I think. Unfortunately, is and this with why the taboo nature and the stigma surrounding
Mm-hmm.
sex, and this again,
Mm-hmm.
this contemporary understanding of religion, with sin, like if you do bad things, you're going to hell. If you do good things, you're going to heaven. Is so dangerous
Yes.
because I think chastity is not even looked at as something as valuable because it's attached to this idea of, oh, if you say air quotes pure and you refrain from having sex, you're good. And if you don't, you're bad, which is a trash way to approach it. And since that's a trash way of thinking, people automatically throw the baby out with the bathwater and think of chastity as something as dumb. But if you look at chastity as something that's a piece of wisdom, as a learning tool, something that you can think about, reflect, that might actually help you grow and mature in your understanding of sex, then I think it's a different conversation. But since as a collectively as a society, we're not approaching it like that. Again, we're approaching it in this binary way of like, oh, you can't tell me if I have sex, I'm bad, which is true. Because if you have sex, it doesn't make you bad. It makes you a human, right? But that's not what the conversation is about. And I think that is, I agree with what you're saying, because I think that is, again, that's one of the biggest inhibitors for growth, I think, in our, with young people's understanding of sex. Because people say fear. Where's the fear coming from? This concept of either you being judged by your family, because why? It's a bad thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's our biggest roadblock. And once we get over that, I think we'll have a much healthier sexual relationships, and um, our behavior and our sex impulse will look a lot more conscious and mature throughout the variety of people's individual beliefs systems, whether you're spiritual, religious, whatever you identify as, regardless of it, it will look healthier in all of its forms.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I'll go ahead.
There's also the other side of this, is that, so one side is the fear, the other side is the glorification of sex.
Yeah,
There are also families that teach the children, quote unquote, a healthy relationship with sex, is that they should have it and experience it and enjoy it and be free with it.
that's trash
Both for
too.
male and female, they teach this to their teenage kids. Fine. I mean, I'm not judging the choice. I'm just saying that those also have repercussions. That I don't know why, who is the authority to say what is a healthy sex life and what is a healthy relationship with sex. I'm saying because these people that I know say that they teach their children, or that the parents taught them to have a healthy sex life, and that means have enjoy sex with a number of sexual partners. So and the reason why I say do they think that they're authority on what is healthy sex is because there is nothing is proven that is healthier. Fear is also not healthy. Making it taboo is definitely not healthy. But I don't think we have figured out as society quite as yet what is a healthy relationship with sex. I
Mhm.
personally believe, from my experience, I what would have been a healthier relationship with sex for me would be something that would look like me not selling myself short and not thinking of myself, because sex became like the power that I had. It became
Mm-hmm.
like an important part of my identity,
Right.
over my mind, and so over my knowledge
Yeah.
and my intelligence and over my spiritual qualities. My sexual power over the people around me became my identity. So
Yep. You
to me,
reduce
that's
yourself
not a
to
healthy
one
relationship with sex.
dimensional.
Sorry.
You reduce yourself to like a one dimensional being.
Exactly. That's what I mean. So to me, that wasn't a good relationship with sex. And if and it doesn't matter. So I made that choice after having grown up with the fear, the fear of feeling for towards sex. But someone that also grows up without fear and just enjoying sex from the beginning, since they're like 13 or whatever, they would also get to that point where that their identity revolves around their sexual capacity, and they are not developing or strengthening as much their mind and their soul, their spiritual qualities. So that's still not healthy either. It's in my from my experience,
Right.
that's still not healthy. So maybe maybe honestly the healthiest way is, first of all, not do the things because the rest of the society does it, or because others around you do it. Also, not do or decide to do something just because your parents tell you to do it. Analyze it, reflect on what your parents are saying,
Thank you.
think about where they're coming from, why, what is the source of their beliefs, etc., and analyze yourself and decide. And then maybe just also, whenever you decide to do something, and that applies to anything, not just sex, whenever you decide to do anything, feel that this is what your body, mind, and soul wants. Not just what your dingling wants, not just what, or your stomach wants. Like when you eat something, think that this is what your body, mind, and soul wants. Yes, it looks delicious. Great. Then let's have this. That's, we have to make our decisions a little more holistically.
Consciously. Yeah.
Exactly. That, consciously, for sure.
I think holistically is even a better word to use. So let me ask you this now, because you touched upon prior to you being married and what it was like for you. What about now? How do you feel it's different?
So, because I've been married 2 years now, I also don't mean to out my husband, but he's had a similar relationship with sex, like both Jason and his older brother. But
I thought you were saying I'm not trying to out my husband, but he know what he doing.
you know what it is. No, I was actually going to say that we actually did our numbers together, and I'm like 4 or 5 times more than him in our numbers. So
Mm.
and that to me proves that experience is overrated. That is to me the perfect example and evidence that, first of all, neither of us needed to do anything before we got married. And secondly, that no matter what type of experiences we had in the past, us together are a clean slate. It's inevitable. We had never been together. We had never met before. This is the first time that these two individuals, these two bodies, minds, and souls are getting together. That is naturally a clean slate. There is nothing in your past experience that will contribute to this moment. So, in a positive way, I mean. It's not like you're bringing like techniques and like moves. Like that's all BS. No, you're with a whole new person with a whole new set of things to discover. So
Mm.
yes, so
Jason's like, I
definitely.
don't know. Jason's like, I got some moves in my
No,
repertoire.
I'm not. No,
I'm in
I
my
agree
bag, dog.
100%.
And
I
also,
can't
by the
even
way,
joke about it. I gotta just affirm what Ruha's saying. I agree.
No,
It's
Jason's
all
like, nah,
foolery at that
I'm
point.
Kyrie. I'm in my bag, dog.
but
So
even
let
these
me say this. Sorry,
moves
can I
and
interrupt?
the technicalities are subjective. Sorry, like every person is different, male and female. I don't like when all men put themselves in one package, like, oh, men like this because I'm a man, I should like this. No, men are not robots either. They have different tastes, different preferences as well. So not all your moves will work on everybody. So
I was gonna
it is.
add the thought real quick.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Jason.
I, if you have moves and you want to always and you say I got these moves, to me what it's saying is I am performing this for myself, and you are the tool for me to prove to myself I got
Right,
moves.
right. That also, yeah.
Which is trash because the sex is not
Yeah,
a selfish, substantive thing. It's an experience between two people, that is shared.
right.
So why are we
Yeah.
focusing on me and what I can do? It's like not about you. It's about you too.
Exactly. And that's the important part. So now I can see this in marriage, although I've been in a long relationship before as well. But I can see in a committed relationship of body, mind, and soul that this sex is a conversation. It's a
Yes,
conversation of many chapters, for
and this
forever chapters.
and let me.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ruha.
No, where and it changes. It's like it has different, as I said, different chapters. It changes. It's not exactly the same all the time, which is another misconception that after you get married, sex is all the same and it gets boring. That's because nobody really understands what sex is. But anyway, to me, this it evolves. It evolves with the marriage. It evolves with the communication. It evolves with different like things that like your state in life, like where you are in your marriage, where you are in like your personal growth, in your career, in like your thoughts about children, in your like material growth, like all these things will affect how you and your husband will have sex, you and your spouse. And it's great. That's a very good thing. That naturally, if you're conscious of that and you accept it, that makes or your sexual experience with your spouse different each time, different in each period of time. And then, yes, a conversation where it's not two robots with set moves, like preset moves that come in to like have fun, because that is actually not fun. The conversation is organic, where we develop our understanding of each other and ourselves in the sexual act with talking, with the conversation. Honest, transparent conversation, no place for ego.
Beautiful,
Exactly.
beautiful.
And let me say this: I want to touch on a couple of things, and I can also speak as a resident virgin some of my thoughts surrounding this. But I wanted to speak on something Jason said when he was talking about sex education and going back to fifth grade. When I said that I think that's bad, I don't think that it's bad that both men and women, or boys and girls, if you're in fifth grade, have a space where they can be, just with other men or just with other women and talk about sex. What I think is bad is that you don't also have a space where you have both men and women talking about sex, because the world is predominantly heterosexual. So these are the two main men and women are going to be the vast majority of the sexual encounters. Therefore, why aren't men and women from an early age together talking about this so they can understand? And it makes it, I think, and inherently it starts the path and you thinking about it as a you thing when sex is not a you thing, it's an us thing. And so you're already automatically starting off on the wrong foot. So I think that's one of the things that sex education can does wrong. It's not even, to call it sex education is a misconception within itself. But one of those things is, it's like, why are we all separated? Like, isn't, sex like a two people involved? Like, why are I'm not? I mean, yeah, it's great that I can be in a space with other men, but like, I'm not trying to have sex with other men. So why can't girls be here too? And we can all talk together.
But also, up
So,
until like 50 years ago, girls and women didn't have that much of a saying in sex. Maybe
yeah, that's
not
true. So
until
maybe, yeah,
the invention of birth control.
yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, so maybe that's just a
Yeah,
perpetuation of
yeah, because
exactly
the
what was happening before.
revolutions just came through, so
Hmm.
male dominance for all time.
Yeah.
For a long time. Now we hit the 20th century, 60s and 50s onward. It's kind of like the first time, women are now so present, in the conversation and so relevant now.
Yeah, so there's a couple things, I'll just share, since we've all been you guys have all been so transparent talking about your experiences and whatnot. For me, it's interesting because I'm 27 and I'm a virgin. I'm not a saint, but I'm a virgin, and it's just interesting. A lot of times when I'm having conversations with people and I'm tell them I'm a virgin, how their first thing is just generally like, "Oh, you must be deprived, or there's something wrong," or like they assume that it's bad, you know. And I think that's indicative of, again, of our collective understanding towards sex, and which is, in order to learn about it or in order to truly experience it and for it to be a good thing, you need to engage with it in some form. Um, so I will say this though, because there's at times where I could have had sex if I wanted to, and looking back on it now that I'm not presently in the moment where I'm having to exercise discipline, I'm like, I'm happy that I didn't do it any of the times that I kind of wanted to do it. Because I mean, I'm thinking about one time I was in school, and for me, I'm lucky that I didn't actually like this girl. Because for me, when it comes to my desire to have sex, if I'm just purely physically attracted to you and that's really it, like, it's just like a primitive, physical physiological thing, where it's just, I see you, I don't even know you, but like, you just turn me on. It's actually quite easy for me to not engage in anything. It's the insertion of emotions and like, a relationship with people that makes that sexual attraction more profound and then harder to resist. But there was this girl that was in school with me in college, and she wanted to have sex. It was quite clear, and I was super physically attracted to her, super. And I'm just thinking, if I would have liked her just even a little bit, I'm not saying that I would have had sex with her, because I would like to think that I would still would have exercised discipline and not. I'm just thinking, had I not exercised discipline and I had sex with her, I would have been lost in the sauce for a long time. I can just I'm thinking about the repercussions that it would have had, because they could have been numerous. And at the very least, it just would have been something that ultimately doesn't serve me at any point other than the time in which I'm doing it. And I think in life in general, I'm not saying that everything you do needs to serve you in the future. There are some things that can just be a present thing that are good for you in the moment. But something as important and profound as sex, I think can never just be reduced to in this moment, do it. And if it only serves me, then I think that more times than not, it's not going to be a good thing for you. And so in that situation, I'm just like, yeah, I could have seen myself just being lost for a long time with that girl. And then that kind of setting me off on a path of like, okay, now I got a taste of the lollipop. I want some, I want some more candy too. And then, you kind of a dog chasing its tail for a while.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm glad you didn't.
Uh, what about yourself, Tim? Do you want to give any insights to how this is your understandings around sex have been changed or altered through personal experience?
Um, yeah, most of my growth and consciousness surrounding sex, I have to say, especially in the last 5 years, has been mostly from educational devices like documentaries, and did purchase a few books on just human history in general, especially as it relates to relationships and sex. A lot of podcasts and things, and just learn how very interconnected and relevant a lot of social realities in life is in relation to, you know, a lot of our social norms, which is pretty much our view of sex, and like you just mentioned in the example, people hear the word virgin, they're like, oh, they either look at you as like, the eye of the apple, like, oh, wow, something to, what I'm saying, like, keep clean, not tarnish, or, people kind of look down on you like, uh-oh, he's not successful. There must be something wrong with him. You know, something must be bad because we've built sex as just like the masterpiece, the centerpiece of just everything in life. We can't do anything with each other without sex being the end result. Which goes back to the whole hypersexualized society. So, you know, I'm really grateful that the information I've been gathering and taking in and absorbing, has not only been exciting and fun, which I feel is an important part, and trying to encourage enthusiasm and encourage people to be excited about these conversations, to want to conversate about it. Um, but also, I'm just happy that I was able to take in a lot of the information over the years in a way that made sense, in which I can conceptualize it and understand it. So,
But what about less in theory and more in like your learnings and in your physical interactions with women in
well, I
the past?
mean, I understand now from my past sexual experiences that, again, I was afraid a lot of the times. A lot of my girlfriends, there was a lot of sneaking. There was a lot of, you know, fear associated with rejection. If we don't do it enough times or do it soon, you know, this relationship may not work out. It may not last long. So there's a lot of things that me and my past girlfriends did that I understand in retrospect was in the effort to protect our sense of security surrounding our relationship. Um, and it was obviously, you know, not rational. It was completely irrational. But it just took, those experiences and many years, you know, after that point to be able to look back and understand it, in a way that I couldn't have before, definitely not during. Um, so yeah, so I think if I had to sum it up in one word, I think overcoming my fear, because it was only after I overcame my fear through understanding that my whole world just opened up as far as my previous experiences and future experiences as it relates to sex. It's like a sense of relief. It's like, whew. I'm glad I'm not blind anymore. I understand. There's not just, I'm just afraid all the time.
True that. So yeah, I guess I know we touched on a lot of things. So unless there's anything in particular anyone wants to bring up, we can all give our final thoughts.
Well, Armand actually brought up a concept yesterday in um, an instant messaging app that me and him use called WhatsApp. We have a group chat in there, and he shared with the group chat uh, an instance, something you saw on Snapchat, Bermond, about a relationship and where a happy
Oh, yeah, I
relationship
saw
where
it.
the wife was
Yeah.
using a cuddling service, um, and is quite successful and happy at the same time in a successful marriage, or they're married. And I just thought that was another closeted subject like sex is, and just a prime example of the many things that we're so afraid to talk about because we don't understand, what is going on in that sort of intimate space.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think we can use that even for another episode within itself. Like that, there's a lot there.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot there. So we can definitely get on that another time. So I guess I can just start with my final thoughts. I'll just say this. I'm gonna be beating a dead horse, and that's bad because I'm vegan, so I shouldn't be beating animals. But I'm gonna beat a dead horse and just say this again. When it comes to anybody who's listening, regardless of how old, how young you are, anyone who has any sort of not even struggle, even if you don't think, even if you're not struggling with anything in your life in regard to sex, to just leave this realm, this binary way of thinking, like if I do it good or bad, if I don't do it good or bad,
Mhm.
and just think about it holistically, think about it consciously. Ask yourself, what type of sexual relationships do I want to have? What do I want sex to mean to me? What do I want it to represent, to be symbolic of? When you're in a relationship with someone, talk to them, ask them, what do we want our sexual experience to be like? What do we want it to manifest? Talk about it conceptually, talk about it in practical terms as well. And I think that if we're coming from that disposition, that ultimately we will continue to grow and mature throughout that process and learn more about ourselves, our partners, and relationships through the experience of sex when we're kind of in command of how we're approaching it instead of being susceptible to forces and reactionary to contemporary ways of thinking or antiquated ways of thinking, as opposed to you developing your sense of understanding within the concept itself from yourself. So that's all I got.
Mhm.
Let me go back to the cuddling real quick, because
Thanks. I want to no, go ahead.
yeah, because I felt like it was the kind of sideline there. Um, if we're doing final statements here, let me just say this. But I appreciate Ruha coming on. Just being a female, being able to talk with men about um, this closeted subject, this taboo subject, is very, very in need as far as having a conversation on both sides of the aisle as far as gender is concerned, and understanding what the experiences is like between the two. It's just so important. So I appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences and knowledge in regards to that. And just conversation. For those of you who've heard this podcast before, you've heard me say this in other episodes. But talk, conversate, when you can, and you have someone being vulnerable with you, especially as it relates to sex and intimacy, you know, do what you can to really incorporate a lot more time into allowing them to unload their opinions and what they're going through, especially in relation to this. Um, so that at the very least, there's no opportunity for more fear and apprehensiveness to settle in, and kind of increasing the likelihood of them being more unwilling to talk about it with someone else. Just the very act of listening to someone is a big deal, and it matters so much. But we appreciate you being here today, listening to us, and Happy New Year's to the audience as well.
Oh, yeah. Final thought for me here, checking out rather. Also want to reiterate my appreciation for Ruha coming on. Ruha, I believe the way what you've been through and how you articulate your experience, your really is profound wisdom, and I feel like I was received a great blessing today. Some of the way, your particular word use was potent for me. So I want to thank you on a personal level like that. On a collective level, I appreciate what we do here at the 206. We're trying to have these conversations. We're trying to be open as much as we can regard some of these topics. This topic in particular is always for me, it's a very much my learning process and right now, and it makes me feel uncomfortable in a lot of ways to have this conversation. So, how much more that we're recording some of it and putting it out there for whoever to decide whatever they want to say about it. Yet, I'm willing to do that because just like Tim had just mentioned, we need to communicate. We need to have these conversations. So, I'm not sure exactly what it looks like for each and every one of us yet. I want to also encourage anyone listening, take a risk for the betterment of yourself. And whether that's in particular conversations with people you already know, or again, finding resources and beginning to create some understanding or courage around the conversation. And let us also remember it's a process of learning life. That is, we're not an end product. We don't finish life in a sense. So we're constantly learning and things are changing. So I have felt I've learned a lot from hearing diverse perspectives and experiences. And my hope is that as a collective humanity, coming from various walks of life, various disciplines, backgrounds, ethnicities, so much diversity that we learn to celebrate it and also learn from each other and how we've grown within our experience. So I want to just send my love and heartfelt prayers to all you here in this group and to our humans out there in the struggle, whether it's through this particular conversation and everything else that's going on in your life. It's a lot all at once. So let's practice taking some time for ourselves to learn and being okay with making mistakes along the way, and trusting that if we're committed, we'll grow and evolve and advance our perspectives.
Yeah. Let me say one more quick thing because I have OCD and I'm going to be up all night thinking like, oh crap, I wanted to say that, but the recording's done. So I'm going to say it now. And then I'm going to pass it over to Ruha. And Ruha, you're going to send this off and give the final word. But I want to say this is that also, I think a lot of us I think a lot of people, we think that sex is the only way to have intimacy because we don't know other ways in which we can have intimacy with other people. And that is something to be mindful of, to see if you could be potentially doing that, because sex is intimate, but it's not the only way you can have intimacy with other people. And you might be using sex when you might actually want some other sort of intimacy as well. So that's all. It wasn't anything revolutionary. It's just I wanted it to be stated, and my OCD would be on overdrive if I didn't. So that's it for me. I'm signing off. Ruha, please send us away.
I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I don't think I have anything special to say about this subject, but we all have different experiences, and it's great that people with different experiences sit together and discuss such an important topic like this. And all the other topics you guys do, I know they're awesome as well. So thank you for giving me the space. I don't have, you actually said something very similar that I wanted to say. I don't have anything particularly special to say, but I was thinking how being vulnerable with someone else is the most intimate you can be with someone. And I don't think sex is one
Yes.
of them, but it's not the most vulnerable you can be.
Yes.
So perhaps, like, if you're considering being with someone, if you're thinking about committing with someone, maybe instead of thinking, oh, I have to have sex with this person to see if I like them for real, think, how vulnerable can I be with this person? How open can I be? And how do they receive my openness? And then that, you got a winner.
Drop the mic home, girl.
Not at all. But thank you all again. Really appreciate being here. You're all great guys.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Until next time, peace.
Deuces.